Okay, the purpose of this video is to look at a few basic derivative rules. The first rule that I want to look at is the power rule. The power rule says that if we have a function f of x equals x to the n, the derivative of x to the n is n, x to the n minus 1. Here's a quick proof of that. Suppose f of x equals x to the n. The derivative of that then is the limit as h approaches 0 of f of x plus h to the n minus x to the n all divided by h. To do the algebraic expansion of x to the n, that's going to be x to the n plus n, x to the n minus 1 h plus, and then we're going to have a different constant, a different coefficient. I'm going to call it c1, x to the n minus 2 h squared, and that's going to continue until we get down to h to the n minus x to the n all divided by h. X to the n minus x to the n is going to cancel out. And now you might be wondering, so what's going on with all of these terms in here? First of all, notice that every single term here has an h in them, so I can factor an h out of all of them. I have n x to the n minus 1, the h comes out, plus now this is c1 plus c1 times x to the n minus 2h plus all of these terms down to x to the n with the h to the n with an h factored out. Every single one of those terms is still going to have an h in them. First of all, h divided by h will equal 0. But then when I substitute 0 in for the h, this term becomes 0, and every one of these terms in here all become 0. The only term that will remain is this term right here when I put the 0 in for h, and so this becomes n x to the n minus 1. And that's our proof that the derivative, if f of x equals x to the n, our derivative of f of x then is n x to the n minus 1. Or we can say that the derivative of x to the n is n x to the n minus 1. So if f of x equals x to the fourth, the derivative of that is 4x to the third. If f of x equals x to the 5/4, the derivative then is 5/4 times x to the 1 minus the n minus 1. 5/4 minus 1 is 5/4 minus 4/4, or is 1/4. So it'll be 1/4. Something like number 7, remember what I want to do is rewrite that as x to the 1/3. So f of x will equal 1/3 x to the negative 2/3, because 1/3 times the 1 here, 1/3 times 1 is 1/3, and then 1/3 minus 1 is negative 2/3. If I'm dividing, f of x equals 1 divided by x to the third, that's x to the negative 3/2. My rule tells me that the derivative of x to the n, is n x to the n minus 1. So the derivative of x to the negative 3 is negative 3 x to the negative 4, because negative 3 minus 1 is negative 3. Okay, so there's a quick look at the power rule.